The stars looked different from the bridge of the Meridian Explorer. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the thick glass window and watched the blue-green planet grow larger as their ship moved closer. 3 years of space travel had brought them here to Keth 7, and now they were finally going to meet the aliens who lived on this world. "Jake, stop looking out there and help me with these tools," called Dr. Amy Carter from across the room. She was organizing medical equipment on a metal table. Her hands moved quickly as she sorted different machines and bottles into neat rows. Jake turned away from the window and walked over to help her. "Sorry, Amy, I just can't believe we're really here. First contact with a new alien race. This is going to change everything." Amy smiled at him. "Yes, but only if we don't mess it up. These Velkans are not like the friendly aliens in old movies. They're hunters, predators. We need to be very careful." Captain Lisa Hayes walked into the room carrying a thick folder of papers. Her uniform was clean and pressed, and her face looked serious. "The diplomatic team is ready. We'll be landing in 2 hours. Jake, I need you to set up the research station as fast as possible. The Velkans agreed to meet us, but they might change their minds if we take too long." Jake nodded and picked up his heavy tool bag. "I'll have the power systems running in 3 hours. The environmental controls will take a bit longer, but we'll have a safe place to meet before sunset." The landing went smoothly. Their shuttle touched down on a flat area of red dirt surrounded by tall purple trees. The air outside was breathable, but it smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. Jake worked quickly to set up the portable buildings that would become their research station. As he connected power cables and checked computer systems, he could see movement in the trees. Dark shapes moved between the purple trunks, watching them. The Velkans were already here, studying the humans from a distance. "They're bigger than I expected," Amy said quietly as she stood next to Jake. She was looking through a pair of special glasses that let her see far away. "The report said they were about our size, but that one over there must be 7 feet tall." Jake wiped sweat from his face and kept working. "Big doesn't always mean dangerous. Maybe they're just curious about us." 2 hours later, the research station was ready. The main building had lights, heat, and clean air. Jake had also set up a smaller building for meetings and a third one for storing supplies. Everything looked professional and welcoming. Captain Hayes used a radio to send a message to the Velkans. The translation computer changed her English words into their language, which sounded like a mix of growls and musical notes. "We are ready to meet. Please come when you feel safe to do so." The answer came back quickly. "We come now. Do not make sudden moves. Do not show teeth." Jake looked confused. "Don't show teeth? What does that mean?" Amy checked her notes about Velkan culture. "Showing teeth is a threat gesture for them. When we smile, they think we're being aggressive. We need to keep our mouths closed during the meeting." 20 minutes later, 3 tall figures walked out of the purple forest. They moved like cats, placing each foot carefully and silently. Their bodies were covered in short gray fur, and they had long tails that swished back and forth as they walked. Their faces were a mix of human and feline features, with large yellow eyes and small noses. The leader was slightly bigger than the others, and wore a belt made of metal and leather. This was Zarthak, the hunting chief who had agreed to meet with the humans. Behind Zarthak walked 2 other adults, and between them ran 2 small creatures that could only be Velkan children. Jake stared at the young ones. They were about the size of house cats, but walked on 2 legs like their parents. Their fur was lighter gray, almost silver, and their big eyes looked at everything with curiosity. They had tiny claws that clicked on the hard ground as they walked. "Those must be the cubs Amy told us about," Jake thought to himself. "They're actually pretty cute." The meeting started well. Captain Hayes spoke slowly and clearly, and the translation computer did its job. Zarthak explained that the Velkans were willing to share information about their world in exchange for learning about human technology. The 2 species could help each other. "My cubs will show you how young Velkans learn to hunt," Zarthak said, looking proudly at the 2 small beings. "Kes and Thek are skilled for their age. They will demonstrate our teaching methods." Amy took notes on her computer while the cubs played a hunting game. They crept around the room, practicing how to move silently and catch imaginary prey. Their movements were graceful and quick, and their eyes never stopped watching for danger. Everything was going perfectly until the storm hit. The first sign of trouble was a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake looked up from his equipment just as the lights in the research station began to flicker. "Electrical storm coming in fast," he called out. I need to shut down the main power and switch to backup systems, but it was too late. Lightning struck something nearby and a massive surge of electricity rushed through the station's power grid. Sparks flew from computer screens, lights exploded in bright flashes, and every machine started making loud warning sounds. The room filled with flashing red emergency lights and the smell of burning electronics. Everyone moved quickly to get away from the dangerous equipment. In the chaos and confusion, nobody noticed two small gray shapes disappearing into the shadows. When the emergency power finally stabilized and the room became quiet again, Zarthak let out a sound that made everyone's blood turn cold. It was a low, deep growl that spoke of anger and fear. "Where are my cubs?" the Velkin demanded, yellow eyes scanning the room. "Where are Kess and Thek?" Jake looked around quickly. The two young Velkins were nowhere to be seen. In all the excitement and flashing lights, they had simply vanished. Zarthak's growl grew louder, and the other adult Velkins moved to flank the humans. Their claws extended and their tails lashed back and forth in agitation. "Find them," Zarthak said, voice full of threat. "Find them now, or this peaceful meeting ends badly for everyone." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Zarthak paced back and forth like a caged animal, her yellow eyes never stopping their search for any sign of her missing cubs. Every few seconds, she would let out a low growl that made the humans step back nervously. Captain Hayes tried to keep her voice calm and steady. "Zarthak, we will find Kess and Thek. Please give us time to search properly. They must be hiding somewhere in the station." "Time?" Zarthak's voice rose to almost a roar. "My cubs are missing in an alien place, surrounded by strange smells and dangerous machines. Every moment they are gone, they could be hurt or killed." Jake had never seen anything as scary as an angry Velkin parent. Zarthak was already tall, but now she seemed to grow even bigger as her fur stood up and her muscles tensed. Her claws were fully extended, leaving deep scratches in the metal floor as she walked. The other two adult Velkins had positioned themselves near the exits, blocking any escape route. Their body language was clear. Nobody was leaving until the cubs were found safe. Amy pulled out her scanner and started checking for any signs of the missing children. The electromagnetic pulse from the storm might have confused them. Young animals often hide when they're scared. They could be anywhere in the station. "Then we search everywhere," Captain Hayes decided. "Jake, you know this station better than anyone. Where would scared children go to hide?" Jake tried to think clearly despite the fear that was making his heart beat fast. "Small spaces, probably. Somewhere dark and quiet where they feel safe. Let me check the ventilation shafts first." He grabbed a flashlight and started removing panels from the walls. The ventilation system was a network of metal tubes that carried air throughout the station. If the cubs had crawled in there, they could be anywhere by now. But the shafts were empty except for dust and the normal smell of recycled air. Jake called out the cubs' names, but only his own echo answered back. Meanwhile, Amy was using her scanner to search the main room. The device could detect body heat and movement, but it was having trouble because of all the electrical interference from the storm damage. "I'm getting some readings, but they're all over the place," she reported. "This equipment wasn't designed to track aliens. Their body temperature might be different from what I'm looking for." Ben Rodriguez, the security officer, had arrived to help with the search. He was a big man with steady hands and a calm voice, but even he looked nervous around the agitated Velkins. "I'll check the storage areas," Ben said, picking up his own flashlight. "Kids like to hide in small enclosed spaces. Maybe they found a closet or supply room." The search spread throughout the station. Captain Hayes organized the humans into teams, with each group taking a different section of the buildings. They looked under tables, behind equipment, inside boxes, and in every corner they could find. But the cubs were nowhere to be found. As the hours passed, Zarthak became more and more dangerous. She had stopped pacing and now stood perfectly still in the center of the main room, watching every human with the focused attention of a hunter. Her breathing was slow and controlled, but her claws remained extended. "This is taking too long," she said quietly. "In Velkin society, adults who lose cubs are considered failures. Adults who let harm come to cubs that are not their own face punishment." Amy looked up from her scanner with worry in her eyes. "What kind of punishment?" Zarthak's answer was simple and terrifying. "Death." The other Velkins had also become more threatening. They no longer stood near the exits like guards. Instead, they moved through the station like predators. sniffing at everything and checking areas the humans had already searched. Their hunting instincts were taking over. Jake realized that the situation was getting out of control. If they didn't find the cubs soon, the diplomatic mission would end in violence. 3 years of space travel and careful planning would be wasted and people might die. "Wait," Amy said suddenly. She was looking at her scanner with a confused expression. "I'm getting some very faint readings from the lower level. It's not consistent, but there's definitely something down there." The lower level of the research station contained the main power generators and life support systems. It was Jake's domain, filled with humming machines and the smell of metal and electricity. If the cubs had gone down there during the storm, they could be hiding among the equipment. The entire group moved downstairs together. The Velkins went first, their keen noses sniffing for any trace of their young. Jake followed, using his knowledge of the station layout to guide the search. The power room was a maze of large machines, thick cables, and control panels. Everything was humming and clicking as the systems worked to keep the station running. There were dozens of places where small creatures could hide. Zarthak moved through the room like a bloodhound, her nose leading her from one machine to another. She could smell her cubs, but the scent trail was confused and broken. The electrical storm had left behind strong odors that masked the natural smell she was used to tracking. "The scent is here, but it goes in many directions," she reported with frustration. "My cubs came through this room, but I cannot tell where they went next." Ben Rodriguez was checking behind the larger machines with his flashlight. "If they're scared, they might not come out even if they hear us calling. Young animals sometimes freeze up when they're frightened." Amy was taking readings with her scanner near the main power unit. "I'm getting stronger signals over here. Something with body heat was near this machine recently." Jake examined the area Amy was pointing to. The main power unit was a large metal box that hummed constantly. It was warm from all the electricity running through it, and there were several small openings where cables entered and exited. "They could have crawled into one of the cable channels," he said, "but those passages connect to other parts of the station. If they're in there, they could be anywhere by now." The search continued for another hour, but with no success. The cubs seemed to have vanished completely. Jake began to worry that something terrible had happened to them during the electrical storm. Maybe they had been hurt by the power surge or trapped somewhere too small for adults to reach. Zarthak's patience was running out. She had been searching for almost 6 hours now, and her protective instincts were overriding everything else. She stood in the middle of the power room and let out a long, mournful howl that echoed through the station. It was the sound of a parent who feared the worst. The other Velkins answered with howls of their own, and suddenly the research station was filled with the eerie music of an alien species in distress. The humans stood frozen, not knowing what to do or say. Jake felt terrible. The cubs had disappeared on his station, while he was responsible for their safety. If something had happened to Kes and Thek, it would be his fault. The guilt was almost as bad as the fear of what the Velkins might do next. "We'll keep searching," Captain Hayes promised, but her voice lacked confidence. "There must be somewhere we haven't looked yet." Jake felt exhausted and defeated as he climbed the stairs back to the upper level of the research station. 6 hours of searching had produced nothing except frustrated Velkins and worried humans. His back ached from crawling through tight spaces, and his hands were cut from moving sharp pieces of damaged equipment. The search teams were taking a short break to eat and drink water, but nobody was really resting. Captain Hayes was trying to keep Zarthak calm by discussing new search strategies, while Amy worked on adjusting her scanner to better detect Velkin life signs. Ben Rodriguez was organizing a grid search of the entire station complex, including the areas outside the buildings. But Jake could see the truth in everyone's eyes. They were starting to lose hope. Zarthak had not eaten or drunk anything since the cubs disappeared. She stood near the main window, staring out at the purple forest as if she expected Kes and Thek to come walking back from the woods. Her tail hung low and her ears were flattened against her head in a way that spoke of deep sadness. "I need to get some better scanning equipment from my quarters," Jake told Captain Hayes. "There are some sensors in my room that might pick up things Amy's scanner is missing." Captain Hayes nodded without much enthusiasm. "Go ahead. Anything that might help." Jake walked down the hallway to his small personal room. Like all the quarters on the research station, it was simple and practical. A narrow bed, a desk, a chair, and a closet for his clothes and personal items. Nothing fancy, but it had been his home for the past 3 months of space travel. He went to his desk and started gathering electronic equipment from the drawers. A motion detector that could sense movement through walls, a heat sensor that could track warm objects in cold environments, a sound amplifier that could pick up quiet noises from far away. As he worked, Jake noticed how quiet his room was compared to the main areas of the station. The thick walls blocked out most of the noise from the search teams and the humming of machines. It was peaceful here, the kind of place where someone might go to hide from chaos and confusion. Jake paused in his work and looked around the room more carefully. Could the Cubs have somehow gotten in here during the storm? He had been in the main room during the electrical surge, but maybe they had wandered through the hallways afterward. He checked under his bed with a flashlight. Nothing but dust and a few spare cables. The closet was empty except for his clothes hanging neatly on hooks. The desk drawers contained only tools and electronic parts. Jake was about to leave when he remembered that he had been wearing his heavy work jacket during the storm response. The jacket was designed for engineering work in space, with multiple pockets and thick insulation to protect against extreme temperatures. He had thrown it on his bed when he came back to get the scanning equipment. The jacket felt heavier than usual when he picked it up. Jake frowned and lifted it higher, feeling the weight shift inside the thick fabric. There was definitely something in one of the inner pockets, something soft and warm that moved slightly when he touched it. Very carefully, Jake reached into the large inner pocket on the left side of the jacket. His fingers touched something soft and furry that was definitely alive. His heart started beating faster as he felt around the edges of two small, warm bodies. Working very slowly so he wouldn't frighten them, Jake opened the pocket wider and peered inside. Two pairs of large yellow eyes looked back at him, blinking in the sudden light. Kes and Thek were curled up together in the warm, dark space, looking completely comfortable and relaxed. They were not injured or scared. In fact, they seemed to be the most relaxed creatures in the entire research station. As Jake watched in amazement, one of the cubs yawned and stretched like a sleepy house cat. The other one made a soft purring sound that vibrated through the jacket fabric. "How did you two get in there?" Jake whispered. The cubs looked up at him with calm, trusting eyes. They showed no fear of the human who had discovered their hiding place. Instead, they seemed to consider him a friend, maybe even a protector. Jake realized what must have happened. During the chaos of the electrical storm, when lights were flashing and machines were making loud noises, the two young Velkins had looked for a safe place to hide. They had found Jake's jacket, which carried his scent and provided the warm, enclosed environment they needed to feel secure. The inner pocket was lined with advanced synthetic materials designed to regulate temperature and provide comfort during long work periods. To the cubs, it must have felt like the safest nest in the entire station. The thick walls of the pocket blocked out scary noises. While the warmth reminded them of sleeping close to their parent, Jake stood there for several minutes, just watching the cubs sleep peacefully in his jacket. They were so small and helpless, but also perfectly trusting. They had chosen him, a complete alien stranger, as their source of safety during a frightening experience. It was a remarkable demonstration of how young animals instinctively recognize kindness and protection, even across species barriers. The cubs couldn't speak to Jake or understand his language, but they had somehow sensed that he was someone who would keep them safe. Finally, Jake knew he had to return the cubs to their parent before Zarthak's worry turned into something dangerous. But he also realized that this moment represented something special. The cubs had taught him something important about trust and the universal need for safety. Very gently, Jake closed the jacket around the cubs and carried them back toward the main room. He could feel them moving slightly inside the warm pocket, but they made no attempt to escape. They seemed content to stay where they were as long as Jake was carrying them. As he walked down the hallway, Jake thought about what this discovery might mean for human-Velkin relations. The cubs had chosen to trust a human during their moment of greatest fear. That had to count for something in Velkin culture. The main room was still tense when Jake returned. Zarthak was pacing again, and the other Velkins were sharpening their claws on pieces of metal equipment. Captain Hayes looked up as Jake entered, hope flickering in her eyes when she saw his expression. "Did you find something?" she asked quietly. Jake nodded and carefully opened his jacket. Two small gray heads peeked out of the inner pocket, blinking sleepily in the bright lights of the main room. "Kes, Thek." Zarthak's voice was filled with relief and joy. She rushed across the room, her threatening posture instantly forgotten. But then she stopped suddenly, staring at the cubs nestled comfortably in Jake's jacket. Her yellow eyes moved from her children to the human who was holding them, and her expression became very strange. The cubs made soft purring sounds and nuzzled against Jake's hand when he gently touched their heads. They were clearly happy and unafraid, showing none of the distress that might be expected from young animals who had been lost and frightened. Zarthak tilted her head to one side, studying the scene with the intense focus of a predator trying to understand something new and unexpected. "They were not hiding from you," she said slowly. "They were hiding with you." The silence in the room was complete. Everyone stared at the two small cubs who were still nestled comfortably in Jake's jacket, showing no desire to leave their warm hiding place. Kess reached out with one tiny paw and touched Jake's finger, while Thek continued to purr softly. Zarthak approached slowly, her movements careful and controlled. Jake could see confusion in her yellow eyes, mixed with relief and something else he couldn't identify. The other adult Velkans had also stopped their threatening behavior and were watching the scene with obvious puzzlement. "I do not understand," Zarthak said quietly. "My cubs chose to stay with you during their fear. This is not normal behavior for young Velkans." Jake gently lifted the cubs out of his jacket and offered them to their parent. But instead of immediately running to Zarthak, Kess and Thek looked back and forth between the two adults as if trying to decide where they wanted to be. Dr. Amy Carter stepped forward with her scanner, taking readings of the cubs' vital signs. "They're completely relaxed," she reported with amazement. "Heart rate normal, body temperature stable, no signs of stress or trauma. It's like they've been sleeping peacefully for the past 6 hours." Captain Hayes was also studying the situation with interest. As a diplomat, she recognized that something important was happening, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. "Zarthak," she said carefully, "in human culture, when children seek comfort from adults who are not their parents, it usually means they recognize those adults as protectors. Is this concept familiar to Velkans?" Zarthak took her cubs gently in her large hands, but her attention remained focused on Jake. "In our society, cubs only approach pack leaders during times of danger. They recognize strength and the ability to provide safety. But Jake is not Velkan. How could my children know to trust him?" Jake felt uncomfortable being the center of so much attention. "I don't know. During the storm, I was just trying to fix the equipment and keep everyone safe. Maybe they sensed that I wasn't a threat." "It is more than that," Zarthak said, her voice becoming thoughtful. "Cubs can smell fear, anger, and aggression. They can also smell kindness and protective instincts. Your scent told them you were safe." Amy was taking notes on her computer, recording everything for the mission reports. This could be significant for future human-Velkan relations. If young Velkans can naturally recognize humans as protectors, it suggests our species might be more compatible than we thought. Ben Rodriguez had been quiet during the entire exchange, but now he spoke up. "Jake, what exactly happened during the storm? Where were you when the cubs went missing?" Jake thought back to the chaotic moments when the electrical surge had damaged their equipment. "I was moving around the room, checking different systems and trying to prevent any dangerous overloads. The cubs were playing their hunting game near the back wall. And then," Captain Hayes prompted, "the lights went out and everything started sparking. I grabbed my jacket and started working on the emergency power systems. I guess the cubs must have crawled into my jacket while I was busy with the repairs." Zarthak made a sound that was almost like laughter, but deeper and more musical. "They chose well. During the storm, you were the calmest person in the room. While everyone else was moving quickly and showing signs of stress, you focused on solving problems. My cubs recognized you as a leader." Jake felt embarrassed by the praise. "I was just doing my job. Engineers are trained to stay calm during emergencies." "That training may have saved more than just our equipment," Captain Hayes observed. "It may have prevented a diplomatic incident that could have ended badly for everyone." The cubs had settled down in Zarthak's arms, but they kept looking at Jake with obvious affection. Thek reached out toward the human with one small paw, as if wanting to touch him again. Dr. Carter made another observation. The cubs seemed to have formed an attachment to Jake. In many species, this kind of bonding happens quickly with individuals who provide safety during stressful situations. Zarthak studied Jake with new interest. "In Velkan culture, there is a term for adults who are trusted by cubs that are not their own. We call them nest guardians. It is a position of great honor and responsibility. What does that mean exactly? Jake asked nervously. It means my cubs have adopted you into our family unit, Zarthak explained. You are now responsible for their welfare when their blood parents are not present. It is not a duty to take lightly. Jake looked around at his fellow humans for guidance, but they all seemed as surprised as he was. Captain Hayes stepped forward to handle the diplomatic implications. Zarthak, we are honored by this recognition, but we need to understand what it means for our mission here. Will this affect our negotiations? Zarthak considered the question seriously. It changes everything. Humans are no longer outsiders seeking permission to study our world. You are now connected to our pack structure. Jake has proven that humans can be trusted with our most precious possessions, our young. The other adult Velkans had been listening to the conversation with growing interest. They approached Jake slowly, their earlier aggression completely gone. One of them sniffed at his jacket, then made approving sounds. They smell the cub's acceptance on your clothing, Zarthak translated. It is a scent marker that identifies you as family. Amy was furiously typing notes into her computer. This is unprecedented. We've just witnessed the first recorded case of interspecies adoption behavior between humans and Velkans. Jake felt overwhelmed by the responsibility that had been placed on him. I don't know anything about raising Velkan cubs. What if I do something wrong? Zarthak's expression became gentle, almost maternal.
You have already proven you can keep them safe.
The rest can be learned. Cubs are resilient creatures and they learn quickly who they can trust. As if to prove her point, Kess made a small chirping sound and reached toward Jake again. When he extended his hand, she grabbed his finger with her tiny paws and held on tightly. She has claimed you, Zarthak said with amusement. There is no going back now. Captain Hayes realized that the diplomatic situation had shifted dramatically. Zarthak, how will this affect our research agreement? We came here to study your culture and share our technology. The agreement remains, but now it is between family members rather than strangers. Zarthak replied. This makes negotiations much simpler. Family helps family. Ben Rodriguez raised a practical concern. What happens when our mission ends and we have to leave Keth 7? Will the cubs understand that Jake has to go back to human space? Zarthak's expression became sad. That will be difficult for them. Cubs do not understand concepts like distance and separation, but perhaps there are other solutions. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. The responsibility was frightening, but there was also something deeply satisfying about being trusted by these small, vulnerable creatures. They had chosen him as their protector, and that choice had changed everything. What kind of other solutions? He asked carefully. Zarthak looked at Captain Hayes and then back at Jake. Perhaps some humans could stay on Keth 7 for longer periods. Perhaps some Velkans could visit human space. When families are separated, they find ways to stay connected. The implications were enormous. What had started as a simple first contact mission was becoming something much larger, a true alliance between two very different species, bound together by the trust of two small cubs who had simply wanted a warm, safe place to sleep during a storm. 3 months had passed since the day Kess and Thek had hidden in Jake's jacket, and the research station on Keth 7 had become something no one had expected. What started as a simple diplomatic outpost had grown into a thriving community where humans and Velkans worked together every day. Jake stood in the expanded engineering section, watching as young Velkans helped human technicians install new equipment. The cubs, now much larger but still playful, moved between the work teams like furry supervisors, investigating everything with their boundless curiosity. Jake, the new power coupling is ready for testing, called out Pete Johnson, one of the engineers who had arrived on the second supply ship. The Velkan craftsmen did amazing work on the connection joints. Jake smiled as he watched Kess carefully examine the new equipment with her growing engineer's eye. At 3 months older, she was about the size of a medium dog and had developed an impressive understanding of how machines worked. Thek preferred to help with the computer systems, his quick reflexes perfect for testing response times. The cubs had kept their promise of adoption, following Jake everywhere and learning human technology with startling speed. But they had also taught the humans valuable lessons about Velkan culture and thinking. Dr. Amy Carter emerged from the medical building, carrying a tablet full of research notes. Her studies of human-Velkan interaction had attracted attention from scientists across the galaxy. The relationship between Jake and the cubs was being studied as a model for future interspecies cooperation. The morning medical checks are complete, Amy reported. Both cubs are healthy and developing normally. Their brain scans show remarkable adaptation to bilingual thinking. They're processing both Velkin and human concepts simultaneously. Captain Hayes joined them from the communications center, where she had been talking to Earth Command. The success of the Keth-7 mission had led to expanded funding and resources, but it had also created new challenges. I just received word from headquarters, she announced. The Meridian Explorer needs to depart for its next mission in 2 weeks. The question is who stays and who goes. Jake felt his stomach tighten. This moment had been coming for months, but he still wasn't ready for it. The cubs had become such an important part of his life that leaving them seemed impossible. But his duties as a fleet engineer meant he was needed on other missions. The cubs won't understand why you have to leave, Amy said gently. They've never experienced permanent separation from someone they consider family. Zarthak approached from the workshop, where she had been teaching human engineers about Velkin metalworking techniques. Over the past 3 months, she had become as attached to the human crew as her cubs were to Jake. There has been much discussion among my people about this problem, she said. We have reached a decision that may surprise you. Jake looked at her with hope and fear. What kind of decision? The Velkin Council has voted to establish a permanent exchange program with humanity. Some of our young adults will travel to human worlds to learn your technology and culture. In return, some humans will stay here to continue the work you have started. Captain Hayes looked interested but cautious. What exactly are you proposing? Zarthak gestured toward the expanded research station, which now included buildings designed by both species working together. This place has become a symbol of cooperation. It should continue to grow. We propose that Jake remain here as the permanent human liaison, while I and my cubs visit human space to establish similar programs on your worlds. Jake felt his heart jump. You would leave Keth-7? But this is your homeworld. Home is where family thrives, Zarthak replied simply. My cubs have chosen you as their nest guardian. For their development to continue properly, we cannot be separated. If you must travel among the stars, then we will travel with you. Amy was already considering the scientific implications. A Velkin family living on human ships and stations would provide incredible research opportunities. We could learn so much about interspecies adaptation and cooperation. Captain Hayes was thinking about the practical aspects. It would require special accommodations, dietary needs, environmental controls, cultural considerations, but it's not impossible. Jake looked at Kess and Thek, who were listening to the adult conversation with the intense focus that young Velkins brought to everything. They couldn't understand all the words, but they clearly sensed that something important was being decided. What do you two think? He asked them directly. Do you want to see the stars? Kess chirped excitedly and ran over to touch the star charts that were displayed on the wall screens. Thek followed her, and both cubs began pointing at different systems and making questioning sounds. They want to explore, Zarthak translated with amusement. Young Velkins are naturally curious about new territories. The idea of visiting other worlds appeals to their hunting instincts. Ben Rodriguez, who had become something of an uncle figure to the cubs, raised a practical concern. What about the other Velkins? Won't they miss their family members? Zarthak's expression became proud. Our society values courage and exploration. Velkins who venture into unknown territories to forge new alliances are considered heroes. My cubs will be honored for their role in building bridges between our peoples. Dr. Carter was already making plans. We would need to modify quarters on the Meridian Explorer, create spaces that feel safe and familiar to Velkins, install proper environmental controls. And we'd need to establish regular communication with Keth-7, Captain Hayes added. The cubs should be able to talk to their extended family whenever they want. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being proposed. 3 months ago, he had been a simple engineer on a first contact mission. Now he was being offered the chance to become humanity's first interspecies family coordinator. There's something else, Zarthak continued. The Velkin artisans have been working on a gift for you, Jake. Something to mark your new role in our society. She gestured to one of the other adult Velkins, who approached carrying a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a jacket unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was clearly based on his original work jacket, but transformed by Velkin craftsmanship into something extraordinary. The outer shell was made from materials that shifted color slightly in different lights, and the inner lining was incredibly soft and warm. Most importantly, it had several specially designed pockets that were perfectly sized for young Velkins. The temperature regulation is more advanced than anything we could build, Amy observed as she examined the jacket. And look at these communication devices built into the pockets. The cubs can talk to you even when they're inside. Jake put on the jacket, and immediately Kes and Thek climbed into their designated pockets. They fit perfectly, with enough room to move around but secure enough to feel safe. The pockets had small windows made from transparent material, so the cubs could see out while staying protected. "It's incredible," Jake said, feeling the almost magical comfort of the jacket's design. "But I can't accept such an expensive gift." "It is not a gift," Zarthak corrected. "It is a tool for your new job. Nest Guardians must be properly equipped to carry their charges safely through any environment." Captain Hayes made the final decision. "Jake, I'm officially reassigning you to the Interspecies Cooperation Program. Your new mission is to work with Zarthak and her cubs to establish similar relationships throughout human space." 2 weeks later, the Meridian Explorer departed from Keth 7 with its most unusual crew members ever. Zarthak had adapted quickly to shipboard life, her natural leadership skills making her popular with the human crew. The cubs treated the entire ship as their playground, investigating every corner and making friends with everyone they met. Jake stood on the bridge, wearing his remarkable jacket with 2 sleepy cubs nestled in the special pockets. Through the main viewport, he could see the stars stretching out ahead of them, full of possibilities for new discoveries and new friendships. "Next stop, Luna Station," Captain Hayes announced. "They're very excited to meet our Velkin guests." Jake felt one of the cubs shift in his pocket and purr softly. Looking down, he saw Thek's bright yellow eyes watching the stars with fascination. In the other pocket, Kes was already asleep, completely trusting in her human nest guardian to keep her safe during the long journey ahead. 6 months ago, Jake had been just another engineer doing his job. Now he was part of something much bigger, a living symbol of what was possible when different species chose to trust each other. It had all started with 2 frightened cubs looking for a warm place to hide, and it had grown into something that would change the galaxy. The stars ahead were full of promise, and Jake Morrison was ready to help his unusual family explore them all.